What the scariest true story you know? The story of the Lake Ness disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. I could not speak. I became unconscious. I could not open my mouth because then I smelled something terrible. I heard my daughter snoring in a terrible way, very abnormal. When crossing to my daughter's bed, I collapsed and fell. I was there till 9 o'clock in the morning of Friday, the next day, until a friend of mine came and knocked at my door. I was surprised to see that my trousers were red, had some stains like honey. I saw some starchy mess on my body. My arms had some wounds. I didn't really know how I got these wounds. I opened the door. I wanted to speak. My breath would not come out. My daughter was already dead. I went into my daughter's bed, thinking that she was still sleeping. I slept till it was 4:30 in the afternoon on Friday, the same day. Then, I managed to go over to my neighbors' houses. They were all dead. I decided to leave, because most of my family was in one. I got my motorcycle. A friend whose father had died left with me. For one. As I rode through Ness, I didn't see any sign of any living thing. When I got to one, I was unable to walk, even to talk. My body was completely weak. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. They lived in a remote location. Turned out the mom had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 little kids had died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. Not exactly a ghost story, but as a parent that scares the shit out of me. There was a similar story also about how a little kid was accidentally abandoned alone at home. The haunting detail was that the bottom shelves of the refrigerator had been emptied, as if he scavenged all the food he could reach until it ran out, although I wonder if it occurred to him to stand on a chair. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess. It was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. TLDR. Patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid and I removed the larva. The story of Hugh Glass. The man was left for dead after being mauled by a grizzly bear. 2 men were supposed to stay behind with him but they were scared of Indians showing up. According to Wikipedia, Glass, who, in the best historical accounts, crawled and stumbled 200 miles, 320 kilometers, to Fort Kiowa, South Dakota, after being abandoned without supplies or weapons by fellow explorers. The man traveled 200 miles on foot while badly injured with the motivation of killing the 2 men who left him behind. He forgave one of them and he couldn't touch the other guy cause he joined the army. You get the death penalty for killing a soldier. The movie The Revenant was loosely based on it. Great movie BTW. Wow. Hugh sounds like an absolute trooper. How old did he end up living to? He lived less than 10 years after that. Got killed by the Arikara. The story of Jamie Claus is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 13-14-ish-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she is just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough, but here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job, at which he only lasted a day, and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning, no grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 feet away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. I got to say that I was completely shocked when they announced when they found her. I thought for sure she was dead. The Raina Marroquin story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s. Got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. I'm not sure what the entire story is, but there was a body discovered somewhere in Siberia. His cause of death was freezing, but something was off. Turns out, he had been attacked by a tiger. The tiger used his jaws and grabbed the guy by his backpack, picked him up over his head, and slammed him so hard that it snapped both of his femurs. Poor dude lived 3 days after the attack, crawling around in the snow. The Nutty Putty Cave Incident. A spelunker got stuck upside down in a narrow cave for 26 hours. Crews tried to pull him out with pulleys, but had to be careful not to break his legs, because that could be fatal with the circumstances he was in. Rescuers even almost dislodged him, only for an anchor to fail at the last second, plunging him back into the crevice. He eventually died, and they sealed the cave shut with him inside. There was a guy in my town who stalked women at the furniture store. He would watch women pick out new chairs and he would just linger there and drop these strange comments. That chair would look nice in my den. Then one night he followed one of the women home. He sneaked into their living room and then wait for them to enter the room. He'd then jump out and surprise them. He'd yell, "I knew you took my chair," and he'd scream and chase them. This happened over the course of 5 years. The local police never did anything because he was brothers with the sheriff. Women couldn't buy furniture by themselves. They had to start bringing chaperones. I used to work at a cave. It was a tourist attraction. Very busy place. The tour guides used to tell people all the different ways that people died in the cave. This script was changed in the late 90s to make the tour more G-rated. But needless to say, all of us employees still know how many people had died there since the 1890s. It was always one of those things that we joked about amongst us. Anyways, one evening after closing, some of the tour guides were messing with a brand new tour guide and told her to go sweep the cave. Remember, this is a cave, so I thought this was the practical joke. Nope. They told her to make sure she got back in an area that was quite a ways back from the entrance. Once they saw she was back there, they started swinging the extremely large, thick, bank vault-like door shut. They managed to get it shut while she was still making a beeline for the entrance. They then turned off the cave lights from the outside. I told the guys to let her out quick and not prolong the torture. We all heard the faint screaming and banging on the vault, and then it stopped. We all quickly rushed to get the door open, flipped the lights on, but she wasn't anywhere to be seen. She was tucked away behind a corner, quite a ways away from the entrance, farther than we thought she could make it in the dark. She was sitting on the ground, rocking back and forth with her arms wrapped around her knees, hyperventilating. After we got her somewhat calmed down, all she said was, "Someone grabbed me." She was never the same after that night. She was a bubbly, outgoing person before, and a quiet, standoffish person after. We could never get her to talk more about it and she quit soon after. I would call it creepy more than scary, but my mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She noticed weird things. A batch of soup depleting faster than usual, missing eggs, damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any, extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. This went on for months. She thought she was just being forgetful. One day she heard some thumping around in her attic and went to investigate. She found some makeshift living quarters, small radio, hot plate, sleeping bag, pillow, food wrappers, etc. She called the cops who came to keep an eye on the place. They ended up catching a homeless man climbing a tree, trying to sneak into her attic window. He had been doing this almost daily. He would wait for her to go to work, then go downstairs and help himself to food and amenities. The funny part about this story is they got to know each other throughout the ordeal, and the guy was actually very respectful. Just down on his luck, she didn't press charges. Instead, let him move in, helped him get a job, and he lived in the attic until he got back on his feet. Creepy-ish with a happy ending. I don't know if it's scary, but when I was younger, me and my twin brother would help our friend do his paper route. One summer we could smell something gross coming from one of the houses. We all didn't think anything of it until 3 days later when the smell was reaching down the driveway. We went to the back door where he normally dropped the paper and noticed it was open. We went in and looked around the house and found the owner dead. He had died of a heart attack and his cats were eating him. Well, this is scary in a weird personal way, but here goes. My grandfather was hit in the lung pretty bad by a sniper in WW2. The bullet would have hit him right in his heart, but at the last second he hunched a little bit to light a cigarette. So, if my grandfather wasn't a smoker, I probably wouldn't exist right now. One of my mom's old co-workers was loading stuff into a truck when an older man came over and offered to help. Apparently he was very nice and polite and just left when they were done. She got the man's name, and when she told her mother, she flipped. Turns out it was Ed Gein, the guy that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on. He was serving time at the Mendota Mental Institute, right next to where she worked. Like I said before, apparently he was actually a very nice person in his later years, but it's still freaky having a run-in with someone so infamous. Someone close to me suffers from schizophrenia and the voices convince them that they would chop up their swan child. They didn't have one, and should end their life. They tried to do that and thankfully their so got home early to see smoke bellowing from the kitchen. Both of them were safe. That's how the so found out that they had schizophrenia. We got them all the help they could and they are doing a lot better now. I know, not scary, but it was sure as hell one heart attack inducing moment for us. A guy I was good friends with had a party one night and called me to invite me over. It was me and my wife's first day off together in a while and our daughter was 2 years old. I mentioned it to my wife and my daughter said no, don't go daddy. Of course I can't resist that, so I stayed home and we had a good night. My friend, however, had the worst night of his life. His party was going good and everything was fine, even though there was a friend of a friend there who no one really knew. Turns out the stranger had been smoking PCP and decided to start killing people. He took a butcher knife and slashed 3 people's throats. My friend's wife threw their kids out of a 2-story window and jumped out herself, took them into the woods and called the police. All 3 people died. The police found the guy walking down the side of the road covered in blood and incoherent. He had no idea what he just did, so he said, "What really pisses me off is he was such a good guy. He was a big biker looking teddy bear, was never an a-hole to anyone and always did what was the right thing. We worked together and hit it off from day one. Always ready with a joke and smile. Maybe not going saved my life, or maybe I could have helped. That weighs on me even 20 years later. The fact that some little pose destroyed the lives of 3 good families that he didn't even know really pisses me off, and I hope he rots in prison and gets his A kicked every day. Rip Blaine, you were a good man." A few years ago, a dude dressed as a clown came to a camp I went to. Apparently he broke into the cabin I was staying in and stole stuff from some people in my cabin. He took primarily cash and a phone that kids had on them. I saw him there, but I was so young I didn't think much of it. Apparently they couldn't find him because of the gloves he wore and his full body costume. All of the kids had their stuff replaced, but the craziest part is a few of us heard a scream that could not have come from a grown man that came from the road. That dude was weird and it was terrifying as an 11-year-old. In 2016, I met a girl that I ended up dating for 16 months that knew how to access red rooms on the dark web. The first night I met her, as we were going to bed in my dorm, she pulled one up and I watched in horror as a guy murdered his boyfriend. The boyfriend was tied down on a bed with a cloth bag on his head, passed out by a lot of alcohol or something. He started waking up when the guy started sawing off his arms with a hacksaw and he screamed in agony. Then the guy proceeded to cut off the boyfriend's legs. By that point, the victim was already passed out or possibly dead from loss of blood. The guy then cut off a slice of meat from his now deceased boyfriend's right butt cheek and fed it to his golden lab. It was so disturbing to see the dog greedily take it. That girl threatened to kill me multiple times, but I never believed her. One time when she was having a panic attack, she tried stabbing me with a box cutter, but I grabbed at her wrist and the knife went into her calf. That relationship was wild. The Silent Gibbon twins. Two sisters who rarely spoke except to each other. They were sent to separate boarding schools to get them to talk to other people, but entered severe catatonia. They were eventually hospitalized and made a pact that if one of them died, the other must speak and live a normal life. They had a months-long discussion and decided which one should commit suicide. Eventually, one died of heart inflammation, no causes noted on the autopsy, and just moments after the planned time the other spoke, "I'm free at last, liberated, and at last Jennifer has given up her life for me." In the 80s there was a Mexican cult led by an American named Adolfo Constanzo. They used to kidnap random people from tourist towns and nearby cities and perform human sacrifice on them in their rural Mexican desert compound, usually torturing in elaborate rituals for hours or days before finally letting them die. These rituals included vivisections, castrations, eyeball removal, tongue removal, teeth pulling, skin flaying, hanging, etc. They used amphetamines and coke to force a victim to stay awake during the torture and not pass out from shock. The cult believed the more pain and fear they could generate in the sacrifice victim, the more powerful the body parts would be as ritual trinkets and also for food for the cult's nganga, which is a large ritual cauldron used to store bones, blood, meat, and other valuable items that the cult believed gave them power. They used to make staves out of wired together spinal columns, and they would often eat the victim's eyeballs during the rituals. They are believed to have kidnapped and sacrificed over 26 people to their nganga in their 3 years that they were active from 1986 to 1989. The leader committed suicide when the police showed up at their compound. They arrested 14 cult members, but most people believe there were at least a dozen more that escaped and are still out there. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There is no antidote. The cure is CPR or life support for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave the body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky, eyes frozen open, unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others. He lay there as the sun slowly burnt out his retinas. He became permanently blind.